I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. In today's video, I am going to be talking about some of the different ways that you can blend your colored pencils. The methods that I am going to be covering today are using colorless blenders. I've got both the Prismacolor and the Derwent colorless blenders. I've got the Derwent burnishing pencil, and then my preferred method using paint thinner with paintbrushes for blending. Now, before people start freaking out, oh my god, you're using paint thinner, it's so dangerous. I oil paint. I don't choose to work in colored pencil because I'm looking for the most non-toxic medium to use. So for me, it's not a big deal. But that said, I also use common sense. I keep my paint thinner in a small container. There's not a lot in here, and when I'm not using it, I keep the lid on it. I don't sit there huffing the paint. I'm not drinking it. I mean, common sense. Not so bad if you pay attention to what you're doing. You don't want to leave this open with the lid open and have your cat come by and start drinking out of it. It will kill the cat. It dries within seconds of using it. So if I use it to blend a small area and I put the lid back on, it's dry right away. I'm not sitting in a room nonstop breathing this. There are other products that are supposed to be more natural, like Zest It, which is hard to get here in the States, but a lot of people swear by that. I do tend to have problems with things that are remotely toxic, and this really hasn't bothered me. But like I said, use common sense, leave a lid on it when you're not using it, because you're not blending nonstop. You may spend 30 seconds blending and then put the lid on it and put it aside until, 15 minutes later you're ready to blend again. So it's not open that much. Anyway, moving on. When I blend with paint thinner, I personally use different synthetic brushes. You don't want a watercolor brush, those are going to be too soft. These are meant more for acrylic painting and they work great. The brand of paint thinner that I use is Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. It really is odorless. You're not going to smell hardly anything. Some people like to blend using a paper blending stump. I don't like to do that because this absorbs so much of the paint thinner, and so you're wasting a lot of it, and you have to add a little bit of pressure to the paper, which just doesn't blend. You don't get as smooth of a finish as you do when you use a paintbrush. So that's why, while a lot of people I know will use these or use Q-tips, it's not getting as nice of an effect as you can get with a paintbrush. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what the term burnishing means, essentially you are pushing really hard with your pencil and you're flattening out the tooth of the paper so that it's nice and smooth. You're jamming the color into it so you don't have all the little white grain of the paper showing through, but you're also flattening it out, so you're not going to be able to do as many layers if you flatten it out first. With me, because I blend as I go along, if I blend with the paint thinner, I can continuously layer on top of layer without ever causing damage to the paper. If I'm burnishing, I'm going to limit myself because I am flattening that paper out. So let's take a look at a few of these samples. First, I'm going to show you just lightly layering. I don't want to push too hard to start off because that will flatten out my paper and it makes it so that it doesn't have enough tooth to really hold the colored pencil as well. I'm going to use a slightly darker color now, still keeping my brush marks. I say brush marks because I paint all the time, but keeping my pencil marks very, very light. I'm using a very light hand for this. As long as you're keeping a light hand and you're not pushing so hard on the paper that you're flattening out the tooth, you can layer tons and tons. I'm going to go one darker, and again, keeping a very, very light hand, and I'm making it darker and darker just by layering on top of layering on top of layer. I am not adding much pressure at this point. And you can leave it exactly like that. Many people will blend that way. This is not my preferred method because I don't like where the white grain of the paper is showing through, but many artists do, and I've seen some beautiful work done just like this. Next, I'm going to show you blending with the colorless blender made by Prismacolor. Now, for blending with the colorless blender, this is going to make my colors much richer. What the Prismacolor one is the wax core without any pigment. So you can see I'm just smudging the colors I already had down together. I'm still not applying much pressure. Now with the colorless blender, you can see that it's darkened everything quite a bit, and if I add more pressure to where I'm actually really burnishing, I'm pushing very hard. Now, one of the things that I like with the Prismacolor colorless blender is I'm able to layer a few more times. You will end up with a wax bloom at some point where it just really, the paper will not take any more color, but for the most part, you can put several layers on here. Now technically the burnishing can be done with your pencil by themselves, not using a colorless blender or a burnisher, just pushing harder with the pencil. Again, mashing the color and the pigment all the way into the little white crevices of the paper, flattening the tooth of the paper out, which is pretty much what I'm doing now by adding this darker blue in there. Another way that a lot of people will blend is to use a white colored pencil. It lightens the color, but you do get a very nice smooth look. In this case, I do want this portion to be lighter, so that works out good for me. Next, I'm using the Derwent blender. This is another colorless type blender. Now, the thing with this one, I actually really like it for my initial blending. The problem is, if you have any intention of going over and layering on top of layer like I do, it starts to gum up. And in that case, it pretty much means I'm never going to use this blender again, besides for these demonstrations. When I start going on top of it, I start getting these heavy gummed up spots where it's like waxy, I don't even know what to call it. It's just these heavy globs where the colored pencil kind of hangs on it, and it doesn't ever smooth back out well. It's starting to do it here where I'm not getting the soft look like I would with when I use the Prismacolor colorless blender. Adding these colors, it hooks on different areas where I may have pushed a little bit harder with that colorless blender. Now I've done enough layering on this one that it really is turning into being more burnished than just blended, because I have started to flatten out that paper by pushing a little bit harder to fight against that colorless blender. It's also a bit crumbly, so like say I want to go back through and blend this some more, I'm going to have more crumbling of the color pencil falling off. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, the little dots showing here. I don't really get that so much with the Prismacolor colorless blender. I mean, if I had to finish a piece with this, I could make it work. It's not like it's a horrible product. It's just, to me, not as ideal as the, if I'm going to use a colorless blender, I definitely do like the Prismacolor one better. But I've heard plenty of people who like the Derwent one, so being that they aren't that expensive, I would definitely say try both and see what you prefer. And if you do try both, I would love to hear in the comments below which one you did like better. Okay, next onto the Derwent burnisher. The burnisher, you're adding a little bit more pressure to begin with, and I actually kind of liked the burnisher. I liked it a little bit more as far as blending than I did the colorless blender. Again, it kind of gunks up the paper, so it's not one you're not going to put layers on top of layers. You're going to do this on your very last layer. For me, I like to layer. I never get anything to where I like it in my first few layers. So this is not a tool that I would pretty much ever use. It also adds a bit of gloss in doing this, and burnishing in general can add a little bit of gloss to your finished product. But the way this gloss is, you end up with shine marks, which you're not going to see in this video, but you end up with shine marks all over that I didn't really love. Now in this case, you can see this one just doesn't have the depth of these because I didn't do as many layers, but it doesn't take other layers quite as nicely as the Prismacolor colorless blender. You can still layer it, the pigment just doesn't get quite as dark. In the end, they're all fairly similar. I do like the control and the amount of layering that I'm able to do with the Prismacolor colorless blender better than the Derwent colorless blender or for the Derwent burnisher, but that's a personal preference. Again, other people may, just depending on how you work, you may prefer one of the others, and because they are inexpensive, I would definitely give them all a try and see what you like. Okay, next, my preferred method of blending using the Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. So I'm using a synthetic brush, and I'm just very lightly brushing over that. And it gives it much more of a painted look, which I personally prefer. And I'm not saying that's the best look and that's the only way to do it. This is just the look that I like. It's how I want my work to look. And if I get brush marks, I just rework those areas to soften them out. If I'm pushing a little harder here just to blend the color here so it's a little bit softer of a transition. And that's just with one layer. Now, once I've let that paint thinner dry for a few seconds, it dries almost instantly. It's very fast. I can go back over this pretty much as many times as I want. I am still using the Prismacolor colored pencils, which are a wax-based pencil. You get a wax bloom built up on your piece, and that wax bloom can make it to where the paper really does not want to take more pigment. Using the paint thinner, it lifts some of that wax bloom off, which means I can add even more layers. The other thing that I really like about using the paint thinner is I don't have to ever apply much pressure with my pencil on the paper. I've had arthritis in my right hand since I was 19, and one of the reasons I had given up on using colored pencils for a very long time was using those colorless blenders were so hard on my hand and my wrist. Using the paint thinner, at no point am I having to put any sort of strain on my hand or my wrist. You can come back on with the white and actually burnish with the white because I do love the look of areas that have been burnished with white. And you don't have to stick with any single method to blend. If you want to use paint thinner on one area and a colorless blender on the other for whatever reason, that's totally fine. They all work pretty well with each other. So now I've got my second layer of colored pencil on there, and I can blend that out. And you do have to watch your brush strokes, because you can see if I left it like that, I've just got a brush stroke, a line going in through the middle there, and I can just blend that out. It does take a little bit of practice of being able to control where your brush strokes are. And when that layer dries, I can use the white and go over it even one more time. I can go over this over and over and over again because the paint thinner does lift off some of that wax bloom. So I'm much less limited when using the paint thinner this way. And there's no set number of I can only do 5 or 6 layers. It completely depends on the type of paper you're using, the amount of pressure you're using, if you've been burnishing to where you flatten that paper out. And I mean, there's just too many factors to say you can only do a certain amount. It's going to depend on how you work yourself. One of the things that I did not mention in that video is that you can use the Derwent burnisher, and let's say you have an area you want it to stay really, really white. You can use that burnisher over the area that you want white, and other color won't stick well over it, so you can use it as a sort of mask. I don't personally work that way. It is an option for you, and you can test that out. Like, you can write your name and then put colored pencil over it, and you will see the colored pencil really isn't going to stick to that burnisher. It just keeps it pretty white. Now, in practice, let's go ahead and take a look at these dragonflies. I did 2 of them. The first one I did partial blending with the Prismacolor colorless blender, the Derwent colorless blender, and the Derwent burnisher. The second dragonfly piece I blended with the paint thinner. To start with, for these, the blue with the damask print, that was airbrushed before I started. Next, I worked with both oil-based and wax-based pencils on this to give you an idea of how each blending method works with both types of pencil. I used Prismacolor for the background on both, and I used the Polychromos, which are oil-based, on the dragonfly and the leaves minus the white. I always switch back to my Prismacolor for the white, but I use the oil-based pencils for that. For the burnishing, that takes a lot longer. It's a lot harder on my hands, so that's one of the reasons that I stopped using that method myself. The results with burnishing are always going to be a bit more grainy than what you can get with paint thinner. Not enough that I would say it's a bad look, just it's a difference, just something you want to be aware of. The upper section I blended and burnished with Prismacolor's colorless blender, the midsection with Derwent's colorless blender, and the bottom section with Derwent's burnisher. The midsection with the Derwent colorless blender, the first layer of blending I really liked. It came out really nice. That pencil's kind of dry and gritty. It's just a little bit different to work with versus the softer wax pencil from Prisma. The problem I had was when I went back and did several more layers, it started gumming up the paper. So once you burnish or blend with that, that needs to really be your final layer. And most people who are going to burnish or blend, that's going to be their final layer anyway. The way that I work, I layer on top of layer on top of layer. I work in colored pencil very much how I paint, and so for me that did not work out well. I'm not saying it won't work for you, it's just that if you're blending continuously as you work, then the Derwent colorless blender, probably not the best choice for you. The Prismacolor one allows for much more layering, and I've never had it gunk up the paper like the Derwent one did. The Derwent burnisher versus the Derwent colorless blender, I don't notice that big of a difference, honestly. It's so minor that I don't know. It's just I didn't see a huge difference between the 2 of them. And there are different burnishers that you can get. There's one, a Lyra Splendor one, I think they call it, that's supposed to be good for working with oil-based pencils. I've not tried that myself, but I have heard good things about that one. It's just harder to find. You have to order it online. Blending the background with paint thinner, it just goes super smooth. I can layer on top of layer on top of layer, and because the paint thinner will lift off a little bit of the color, it'll lift off a little bit of the wax bloom when you're working in Prismacolor, it allows me to add even more layers. A lot of people will complain that it dulls the color. Well, I generally just blend my first few layers, and like when I paint, I use so many layers that I really haven't had a problem with my colors not being bold or vibrant enough when using the paint thinner. Once I got onto the dragonfly, part of the burnishing was being done with the Polychromos pencils themselves. Those pencils work wonderfully with burnishing without needing a separate tool to do so. But for different areas where I wanted to blend the background, like on the wings, I needed a base of green before I put the black detail on there. That's harder to do with the burnishers because they add a bit of a waxy finish over them, so it's hard to get the detail back on top of it like I needed. When I did that in paint thinner, I put the green down first, I blended that out, and then used my black pencil to get the little details in the wings, and my lines were much cleaner, much crisper. So when doing a lot of fine detail, I really do prefer the paint thinner. It does allow me to get more layers cleaner. For the rest of the leaves while burnishing versus using the paint thinner, they're pretty similar until you try to do tiny detail. Like I said before, with burnishing, you're flattening out the tooth of the paper, so the paper's not going to take that much more detail. If I'm blending with the odorless paint thinner, then I can layer on top of layer on top of layer. I'm not damaging that paper, so I can just continuously work and get as much detail as I want. The type of blending that you go with is really going to depend on your preferences and how you work. I've seen amazing and stunning pieces done with every single one of these methods, so there's no way you can say, well, which one's right for me? Try it. You just need to try it on your own. Most of these are fairly inexpensive, including the paint thinner, because that paint thinner lasts a long time, but they're very, very inexpensive. I would try them all out and see what you prefer. I have new video critiques every Tuesday where I am critiquing one of your original paintings or drawings, my own speed paintings, drawings, and tutorials every Wednesday, and vlogs most weekends. So make sure you subscribe and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those social media sites to keep up with news, my newest work, and to see real-time video of whatever it is I am currently working on. I'll see you guys in a few days. Hi guys, I only covered a few different ways that you can blend colored pencils. If you have a different way that you like, or even if one of these methods that I showed here are one of your favorites, let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. I'll see you guys in a few days. Bye.